Hello, I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session for Tuesday, January 12th, 2021. It is 6:31 or 18:31, and all council members are present except for Council Member Elrod, who will be joining us any second. So, Council, we have two items on our agenda tonight. Our first item is ID number 21-005. That is the Unified Land Use Code. And council, we have a couple things tonight. Council will receive, staff is going to update council on the progress of the mixed use and the corridor building block of the Unified Land Use Code. Also, we're going to get a presentation from council, and Council Member Elrod has joined us. And we will be getting a presentation from staff. And council, if you could hold off on your questions until the presentation is over. It's about a 20-25 minute presentation. And with that, council, it is likely that we will be getting an ask from staff. So we, council, may be giving some policy direction at the end of this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. And welcome back from obviously the holidays. And tonight is our first real briefing on the ULUC for the year. And as we all know, this is the most significant project the city is taking on this year. And we are moving ahead with this. We have a pretty robust schedule here for the next several months. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Osher, and she's going to do a little bit of an introduction here and kick us off.
All right. Thanks so much, Mark. Good evening, Council. Kathleen Osher, Community Services Director. Excited to be back since we turned the page on the adoption of Title X amendments and, of course, the corresponding zoning map. Tonight, our hope is that we can elevate your understanding of how we bring all of the aspirational goals from the comprehensive plan to life through our transition to a unified land use code. We're guided every step of the way by our North Star, the Envision Littleton Comprehensive and Transportation Master Plans. The future land use map, as you know, has served as a starting point. Just to reemphasize what Mark said in his opening comments, this work is hard. Our timeline is aggressive. And you've heard numerous times that this is one of the most important things that a city can do. You know it is our top priority, so I'm going to thank you in advance for all of your hard work, the hard work of our Planning Commission, our Historical Preservation Board, and the tremendous amount of work that we are asking of our staff. We have been working over the last few months to combine all that we've heard from studios, from other conversations, from information that we learned and gleaned throughout the multi-year process of Envision. And we, have had our fair challenges in terms of getting community engagement and input. Nothing throws a monkey wrench like a pandemic. And we are, despite all of that, we had a scope that included lots of in-person conversation and discussions. And we've only been able to be together once as part of this unified land use code. And it's coming up almost a year ago, our kickoff event that we hosted at Town Hall Arts Center, on, I think that was February 6th. So it's amazing to think how much progress we've made and how much generosity the community has brought to this conversation in spite of those very many challenges. The studios have been incredibly helpful, as well as other conversations. In December, we actually took our studio and worked furiously with Tyler and his colleague in communications, Shira, to get that up the next day, as well as those polling questions, where we had, a little over 80 visitors to that effort, and 23 were able to complete the survey or polling questions that were part of that. So it was additional input. We're seeing success with maybe breaking that down into smaller conversations as we think about additional ways and creative ways to make sure that we get the broadest community input and broaden the conversation. So our hope is that we're able to craft sort of a 3 to 10 minute, more bite-sized pieces with corresponding questions so that we continue to get input from more residents and businesses throughout the city. Tonight's intention with council is to provide a briefing. Again, our recommendation, and as the mayor shared, is that we power through the slides and Brett present those and then have a discussion and questions directly following that. I think that will leave us the greater balance of the evening for discussion and questions, as we think we can get through these slides in about 25, 30 minutes. This is a briefing on our progress. We've obviously combined the conversations with you and community. We're really providing you with our sort of big picture approach. We're trying to make those connections this evening about the policy direction that you have provided and how that translates into the Unified Land Use Code. We also have a few of the parking lot items that we had during downtown that we are now bringing back to confirm that this is the direction that we think we can take the ULUC does line up with the direction and policy direction that you would have for those issues. Again, what we're bringing tonight for conversation would be sustainability, greenscaping, and then parking as well. So we have some pieces of those that we'd like to take a temperature read and make sure that we're in line with the direction that council would provide. So again, a briefing mostly, a great opportunity to ask questions and have that discussion. And we'd like to ultimately confirm that we've got the right direction for those 3 parking lot items. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brett Keast, our consultant with Candid Keast Collaborative. He's become quite a familiar face for you as, again, we near the 1-year anniversary of starting the Unified Land Use Code with our kickoff event. Brett, is there anything that you would add in terms of direction that you may need from council tonight beyond what I covered?
No, I think you did a wonderful job, Kathleen. As indicated, we're going to try to keep 2/3 of our time this evening for questions, answers, and conversation. So I think that's where the real value is. So I won't shortcut the presentation, make sure and touch on everything, but we'll have a lot of time for question and answer.
Perfect. Well, then I will turn it over to Brett. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Pleased to be back with you. I trust you all had enjoyable and restful times over the holidays. As Kathleen indicated, tonight is to just kind of give you a briefing on our thinking and where we believe we can end up on these points that I'll be covering tonight and what we believe we can accomplish. All of this is in the context of the Littleton Comprehensive Plan and Transportation Master Plan. And I want to emphasize that this is kind of a cumulative, it builds on itself type of process, and it's iterative. So like you, we continue to learn and we understand new things and greater understanding of the community's objectives as we get into this process. So this is very much a community-driven process. So while we will bring to bear all the professional expertise and our experience in drafting land use codes, this is a code that is solely for Littleton, Colorado. And so the guidance that we get from you and everything that we hear through staff, through emails, through polls, through Envision Studios, through these workshops, all comes together. So there's really not anything that outweighs the other, but it paints a broader picture for us. And that helps us to get as close as we can to what we understand is the policy directions at a more detailed level than what we're able to get to in a policy document like the comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to kind of set some context that overall, this is going to be a unified land use code. So that's different than what you've had before, where you've had independent ordinances and you've had separate guidelines. And so this is going to pull all those things together. This will make it a great deal more informative and helpful for anybody that goes through the process, a lot more helpful and easier to administer for staff. We've said from the beginning that the 2 most important words here are predictable and certain. And the only way to do that is to provide enough text that we can articulate clearly what's necessary in order to reach the aspirations and the policies and the goals that are spelled out in the plan documents and that the guidance that we get from you. So that's what we are doing, trying to write, detailed text that is very articulate and clear, not leaving a lot of things silent, trying not to leave things to just open discretion without any guidance in terms of decision criteria or things that can be utilized to help commission and council and board and others to make that decision. At the same time, we want to try to simplify. And when I say simplify, there might be more text, but we could do a lot of things in terms of streamlining process, taking out unnecessary steps, consolidating districts, which we're going to talk about a little bit more tonight, and why that's important and how that simplifies. Using more illustrations. You're going to see several of those tonight to try to help people understand what it is that we're trying to achieve and how some of the regulations are applied. And of course, as Kathleen said, our guiding principles through the implementation of the plan. I think it is important to note that we are starting with the regulations as they are, and we're building on top of those. We are not downzoning or reducing, development opportunity. We are starting from where we are and building on that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the specific details of the plan. But I just want to assure you that we hear you. It's very important that we continue to hear you, and any guidance that you give us and questions you ask all goes together to a more perfect, if there is a more perfect unified land use code. So just to kind of give you an idea of what is included, the ULUC is organized. It's kind of the first time we've ever done it for Littleton, because Littleton really deserved a structure that's built around, your comprehensive plan and land use plan and so forth. So there are several sections at the beginning of the code that will apply generally across all districts. And then within each of the districts or the building blocks, in this case, the corridor mixed use area, there will be standards that are directly applicable to that building block area. And I'll expand upon that as we go. So some of the things that will be included that you will ultimately see that will be drafted as part of the corridor mixed use or the CMU block will be building standards. We have standards for single family attached and apartments, as well as mixed use. We've also planning to expand beyond that to talk about, large scale development, whether that's big box stores or, any type of large scale development. So we'll have, building design standards that obviously contributes to character. Building form and material standards. So continuing on with what you saw with the downtown of having graphics to help to illustrate building form and height and placement and all those types of things for each of the districts. There has been questions, and it's come up a few times about thinking about the design of sites relative to crime and crime prevention. So we would expect that will be a section that will be added into this, whereby, for instance, staff and police department may review these things for, defensible space and for view corridors and lighting and other things of that nature to make sure that what's built is going to be, safe. Sustainability, we know that's a big topic. We expect to add a lot of incentives into this. There will be some things that, will be required. There'll be other things that will be incentivized, whereby they might be able to get, increased density or height or expedited processes and other things like that in exchange for adding additional sustainable features to their projects. greenscaping, kind of all things green. That's landscape surface ratio, that portion of the site that is green, and then all the planting requirements, protecting, preserving existing trees, as well as providing landscaping that could be at the foundation, that could be street trees, that could be interior to a parking lot, that could be perimeter, and then certainly buffer yards when you have two districts with different intensities of uses adjacent to one another. Where we were very constrained within downtown, we're not as constrained on these properties, so there will be buffer yard requirements. Vehicular mobility, all the parking and loading standards, obviously we've had lots of conversations about that. The way we envision setting that up is having minimum parking standards, maximum standards, and then standards within a transit shed. So where you have a fixed transit improvement, i.e. Your light rail stations, or potentially in the future a bus rapid transit, or you have another fixed improvement, there can be a reduction of parking within a distance around that improvement or that investment. The design of parking lots, how do we deal with large parking lots? How do we deal with pedestrians? How do we deal with bicycles? How do we create connections for nearby transit? And then, of course, use and maintenance of those parking lots. Managed access in terms of number of driveways and alignment of driveways. Sign standards, obviously, outdoor lighting standards will be included. And then, of course, all the districts and land uses and the frontage and building types for each of the individual districts. So that's unwrapping a lot. So there's going to be a lot of content touching on, a lot of different areas, all of which are either in the ordinance today or have been requested or questioned or pointed out as we've come to this point in the process. So I think you're all familiar by now. The corridor areas are basically those that are shown in purple. Up and down all the major corridors. That's what we're working on for the time being. In terms of the zoning, pretty much every zoning district that you have in town is located somewhere in these districts. So it's very, broken up, a lot of different use types, a lot of different standards. Some districts have very little standards. So the current ordinance just doesn't really provide a lot of deliberate direction in terms of what is our vision, what is the character. Do we want buildings set clear at the back of the lot with parking lots in front? Do we want the buildings brought to the front? How do we want to landscape them? All those things that we've talked about are vital to building out this code and getting us to, the end state where we want to be in 5 years and by 2040. So that's just kind of a rundown of some of the districts. Again, we started with the base districts. And if we're consolidating some of the districts, we're basically grouping those on the map. We're not looking at this being a widespread citywide rezoning of all property. There could be some of that, but that will primarily be driven by, commissioner council direction, or if we recommend some consideration. But that's, rezoning is not a big effort of this. And in fact, we're trying not to rezone. At the last Envision Studio in December, we had poll questions. I just want to emphasize that this is just one aspect of the input. This isn't the end all be all. There were some follow-up polling. They generally showed a lot of the same types of perceptions and priorities as what we're showing here. But again, this is just one input. It's not as much about exactly what is said, but it's more to us. Since I've been doing this for 30 years, I can look at that and say, okay, what they're wanting is better building and site design standards to treat these conditions, whatever that might be. So along Littleton Boulevard, for instance, just retaining the character. We know that there's mid-modern architecture along there. We know that it has a unique street cross-section with the Boulevard. And so, that's really what we drew out of what we heard from them. Desire for buildings really being brought closer to the street. If there is a parking lot in front, we can address that with other types of standards, but the aim is not to, fill the frontage up with parking lots. The aim is to keep yards or green spaces or, bringing the building closer to the street so we have a more intimate, walkable type of environment, much different than what you'd see along Broadway or along Mineral or along Santa Fe. Drive-through uses, we can write standards for drive-through uses. I was a little bit surprised that they said, those could be okay as long as there's good design. I think there's probably more appropriate places for drive-through uses than along Littleton Boulevard. So that may be limited, but we can still draft good standards for that. You have a T district right now, and you have a B1 district right now. A lot of similarities between them. The main difference is the T district allows for residential uses. The B1 district is intended to be neighborhood, but yet it's not real neighborhood today in terms of the setbacks and the land use types and so forth. So we intend to make that, more of a true neighborhood business district that would be better when adjacent to low density residential, wouldn't be as impactful, not as intense as you would see in other parts of the community. So we're proposing to consolidate those two districts. We initially were thinking suburban commercial, but think now that that's probably not the most appropriate. So maybe more of a neighborhood business is more indicative of what the Littleton corridor could be. And then we're looking at a conservation district. So you have historic landmarks, you have historic districts. A conservation district could be applied in a number of different ways. In the context of the corridors, we could see there being a conservation district along Littleton to protect a lot of the mid-modern architecture. It would have its own set of standards that would help protect and defend the character of that corridor and specifically those buildings. This could be applied in areas that maybe are not yet eligible for historic designation, or maybe there's not yet support for establishing a historic district. So it is a bridge, if you will, that we can have more standards than what we'd have in a base district, but maybe not quite as far as you would go with certificates of appropriateness with a historic preservation district. We will also be talking about conservation district in the context of neighborhoods for another conversation another day. There was the study along Littleton Boulevard that identified properties of various levels of significance. So those are just one segment, but the point is that we realize that that's very important. So that needs to be factored into the land use code. Relative to Broadway, just thinking about the juxtaposition of, some pretty intensive uses versus residential directly across the street. The poll, really what I read from this is a need for better building and site design standards and some transition standards to make sure that when those districts do come into each other, that they're maybe a little bit more sensitive to one another. So that's what we drew from the outcome of that poll. The B2, these are the current standards and some of the land uses that are in the B2 district. You can see where they are zoned. There's some kind of right in the core between Santa Fe and Broadway on Littleton Boulevard, quite a bit up and down along Broadway, and then some along Bellevue. There's a 2.0 floor area ratio. In an earlier presentation, we were starting to explore districts and so forth. I think maybe where some conversation came from is we were thinking at that time that maybe the FAR was too significant. With the districts that we have now, that's not the case. So we're not proposing to reduce FAR. Right now, there are no height limits, so we can talk about that more with some of the questions and ways to do that. And then just some of the uses. We're proposing to consolidate that with the B3 district. As you see, there's a very few parcels that are currently zoned B3. A lot of the land uses are basically the same. A lot of the standards are the same. Again, there's no height limit. There's just about the same open space. There's 3.0 floor area versus 2.0 in the B2. There's so much that are common and so few properties that we think it makes sense to consolidate 2 districts into 1. By consolidating districts, we have a simpler zoning map. There's fewer rezonings that are necessary. There's less public hearings, less staff reports, less time for development applicants. So just a lot of advantages for doing that. These are the planned development districts that relate to the corridors. There's probably more of these than there is the B2 and B3 properties. Obviously, reason being that, the current districts you have now didn't go far enough in terms of articulating, what the desire was. And so the planned development district or planned overlay district is what was used to get there. We believe that the Unified Land Use Code will be able to have all the standards that can replace the PDs. PDs, as you know, is a involved process. It takes a ton of staff time. It takes a ton of applicant time and a lot of money. And so if we can find a quicker path for them and, better outcomes and no compromise in terms of quality, we certainly want to do that. We're proposing to create a PDO district for the time being. And basically, any minor amendments to plan development applications could take place, but any development activity that happens would basically come into conformance with the ULUC, and then that PD would cease to exist. So over the course of time, those could be sunsetted and rolled back into the base districts. Again, that could save a lot of time and a lot of dollars and better standards than what you're getting right now with the PDOs or PD districts. Industrial, there's a handful or a sprinkling of parcels that are zoned industrial within the corridor mixed use area. There's some questions posed to them about what to do with those. I think the outcome is not necessarily to, chase them away. Industrial is a big part of the tax base of bringing outside dollars into the community, which we know is vital. It's more creating good standards and making sure that they're good neighbors. And maybe, you're not going to have as intensive uses as you will in the light industrial and other districts in the southeast part of town. So, we can do appearance standards, industrial performance standards to deal with light and noise and odor and, all those types of things to address any concerns with that. Certainly water quality, water runoff, all those types of things are important for those types of uses. So these are the zoning districts that are identified. The industrial districts are included in the last building block. So we've just talked about them here in the context of the corridors, but the actual regulations for industrial will be drafted in a handful of months. Again, I think suburban commercial will probably change to more like neighborhood business or something, which carries through your current B1 neighborhood business. We're talking about consolidating the T and B1 districts, bringing the B2, B3, and the PD districts into a CM, which is corridor mixed. Again, that's all the purple areas along the corridors, and that is also the land use designation on the land use and character plan. We believe that it's very, very important. There's a lot of confusion created when you have a land use plan district and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zoning districts to implement that. We would rather see there be a one-to-one relationship. Somebody can look at the land use plan, see that it's zone corridor mixed use. They can look at the zoning ordinance, see that we have a corridor mixed district, and they can see how that implements the policies. It's much easier to understand, interpret, and to explain. The PDs, we foresee them going away in time. If for some reason they needed to stay, they could as an alternate, but that is not what we would propose. And then we're also proposing a public and institutional district for, public, city, county, state properties. so that they are zoned, because some of those uses don't fit tidy and neatly within other districts and they can become a problem. So this would help to resolve any things of that nature. We have proposed a series of frontage types. And these frontage types apply to the different districts. So just to go through them real quick, in the upper left, there's a build to. That's when we bring the building to a front property line, okay? So obviously we saw that in downtown. We could see that in a mixed use development. Foreseeably, there could be some of that along Littleton Boulevard. How do we deal with drive-through uses? What are the standards for those? Where do they take access? How does that affect site circulation and access? How does it appear aesthetically? How is it screened and buffered? So we want to have standards for drive-through uses. Green is basically where the building sits back a little bit, but it's all green in front of the building. There's no parking. So parking would be to the rear of the property and maybe some to the side. Again, that could be used, along Littleton Boulevard, and there may be other places that it's appropriate along other corridors. A parking court is where there is some amount of parking provided in the front, but the balance of it in the back. That would be for retrofits. This is already the condition in many, many places. Somebody wants to use adaptive reuse on that building, but they're not completely scraping the site and starting over. They want to just work within that. We can accommodate 1 or 2 rows of parking in the front with good landscaping and screening and interior parking, but bring the building to the front so there's more of an emphasis on the building and it's closer to the street for pedestrian access, so forth. Shop fronts, again, having a green front, having a series of shops with connections between them, but the parking to the rear. A stoop basically brings, it's kind of like what you're seeing with some of the townhomes in downtown, where you bring units all the way to the street, but you do have some limited yard. And then yard, these are like the single family homes that have been converted on Littleton Boulevard, where, they were single family residents. They were built as such with a front yard. There is, a driveway. So that is the purpose of that. So for each district, we are identifying different frontage types. The big goal here is not to have huge parking fields laid out in front along the corridors and, tiny buildings at the back of the site, because parking consumes the entire site. So that goes together with the parking requirements, minimums, maximums, transit sheds, etc. So this graphic shows an example of what could be, for instance, along Littleton Boulevard, where you have what were one time houses that we maintain the front yard. We create pedestrian connections to the street. We make sure we have a continuous sidewalk all along there. We provide parking in the rear, and then we do a nice buffer yard treatment along the rear that may abut, some other type of district. So that would be an example of one frontage type, for the shop front and the yard frontage types. This would be an example of a parking court where you can have maybe 1 or 2 bays of parking in front, but that's it. The rest of the parking would have to be to the rear. We want to make sure that we have pedestrian connections from the street to there. We define edges of parking lots. So we have parkways and landscaping and screening, definitive driveways, ways that we can direct and move traffic throughout, foundation plantings. So there's all these types of things that can help to soften and improve upon a lot of the retrofit properties that may redevelop over time. A green, where we can have a building that's brought to a corner, but there's a wide swath of green and along both street frontages, with obviously sidewalks, using berms to help screen and create interesting landscapes. Again, putting parking to the side and to the rear, using access off side streets. So that would be an example of a green. This could be a drive-through where that could be fit on the site, where we have, screening and landscaping and good building wall architecture along the street. This would be if the street is along the top edge of this, bringing the building to the street. Instead of having one giant building, breaking that into a couple smaller pieces with, kind of a public gathering area separating them. So working that into this, having good landscaping throughout the parking lot and screening along street edges. And again, pedestrian and bikeway connections, things of that nature. And also when we have access to a greenway, making sure that we're not turning our back on that greenway, that we're creating public access and public connections to that greenway or open space or park or whatever that might be. This is an example of what could be a mixed-use development. This is the old mall property that sits south of Bellevue and east of Irving Street over to Federal, just showing you how this could bring a lot of additional leasable commercial office square footage, a lot more dwelling units and residences, some of which could be for mixed income housing, addressing affordable housing, aging in place, making it highly walkable with good, streets and walkways throughout, integrating civic spaces, civic buildings, things of that nature. This could be built out in phases over the course of time, and making sure that we're thinking a lot about the pedestrian. We're thinking about transit orientation of where people, how they would access transit stops, how that would be integrated into the design. And then being sensitive to the properties that are crossed by having, comparable scale and unit types. So that covers a lot of what we envision being included in this corridor mixed use and the three districts, the neighborhood business, the corridor mixed, and the public institutional. This is a carryover issue. We've talked about sustainability. We see there being a menu of practices that would address things like energy conservation, LEED certification, water conservation and quality protection. There's a whole lot of other types of things that could be included in this. As I said, some of these could be required. Others of these could be a menu whereby if they include these in their development design, that they can get incentives by way of an increase in density, an increase in height, an increase in lot coverage, reductions in parking, increases in allowable sign area and height as an incentive. So these are kind of give and take, if you will, as well as a reduction in open space in exchange for more sustainable use of some of that open space or green roads or whatever that might be. So we see sustainability being a common thread throughout all the districts and being interwoven into, all things parking lot design and site design, and then providing, incentive for people to take advantage of all these types of sustainable means. So this is kind of an example where there could be rainwater collection off of roofs that can be water that's reused. There could be bioswales that are collecting water in parking lots and rain gardens to help treat water before it's released and to store. So to deal with not only the volume, but also the quality of water. There can be some provisions for pervious pavement, impervious cover, providing for electric vehicle parking, for compact parking. So these are all the types of things. For instance, there are going to be provisions in the parking that will provide for, a certain percentage of parking lots set aside for electric vehicles, a certain percentage of parking places set aside for compact vehicles. things of that nature. So again, these things will be interwoven throughout the code, and then there will be incentive to take it even further. So just a few graphic examples. Obviously, these can be very much character producing, very attractive, and also functional at the same time. Greenscaping. We intend to have a canopy coverage that is required for each of the different districts. So that will be something that will be calculated and shown on site plans or a master development plan for mixed-use development. Obviously, first is to protect existing trees to the maximum extent practicable, and then planting. Those plantings can be, again, along the foundation or within open space, street trees, a number of different ways that they can meet that. And those are all going to be according to the frontage type. So this is kind of an example of, the landscape or the requirements for build to and a green, where you have different street conditions, and so therefore you have different required parking or landscaping, greenscaping. Parking, this is an example of establishing minimum parking standards, maximum parking standards, and then a reduction for those that are in near proximity to a permanent transit improvement. So this is just kind of a clip of showing what that might look like. And I already mentioned compact cars, electric and alternative fuel, having standards for drive-throughs and stacking. All those types of things would be included in this section. So that is a introduction, I guess. So we have about 45 minutes remaining, looks like. So I'd be happy to jump back to any of these other slides that you have questions of. So I'll turn it over to the mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. And we'll start with questions now, and Councilmember Fay has her hand up.
Brett, could you remind us what walkable or walkability means? Some specifics of what meets that definition?
If I heard you right, Carol, it was what walkability means?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, walkability is, from the simplest term, of making sure that there is infrastructure to provide for pedestrians and bicycles. That's in the most simple form. People will not get out of their cars and walk unless there's places to walk from and walk to. The way the community has been developed has been built around the auto. So, people that are going to visit a business along Santa Fe, for instance, are going to drive there unless they happen to live in an apartment or they're nearby, but chances are they might even drive. Because the pedestrian and bicycle has been an afterthought in the site design. Providing for mixed use creates a lot of opportunities for walkability. Recognizing, though, that not every property is going to develop as mixed use. So we need to make sure that we have standards and that we are including all things walkable for pedestrians, whether that's public access easements between properties to provide access out to greenways or to adjacent trails or properties, whether that is thinking about how we move pedestrians through large parking lots, whether that's thinking about how we move pedestrians from a development site to a transit stop. So all those things define walkability. So that too, and I'm glad you asked that question, because that is a common thread that will come all the way through this code to making sure that we are giving due credit and due consideration of making this community much more walkable. Downtown is probably the best example you have of being walkable. If you create a mixed-use development like the illustration that I showed, highly walkable. You can live there, you can work there, you can recreate there, you can shop there, and you can walk. and you can take access to a transit stop and commute, in and out. So that's what I would define as being walkable.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Grove, then Driscoll.
More of a comment, maybe suggestion. I noticed
Okay.
on the areas of B1, B2, and industrial that you have allowed land uses are animal treatment and boarding. And is there a way to consider a buffer? And where I'm coming from, at the corner of County Line and it's like Pennsylvania, it's a little off Broadway. There's a big commercial area, but right up against it is residential. And we had a lot of neighbors that did not want an animal boarding place because of the outside pens and the impact on noise. And I noticed that place is covered in this. So, and it may make sense, like if something was over at Southbridge, maybe there's it's not a lot of residential over there in certain areas. So maybe just to put in a buffer to help.
Yeah, we'll go even farther than that, Pam. We could define, vet clinics and animal boarding and grooming and things of that in a couple of different ways. Some of them, you bring your dog in, you get a shot, and you take them home. Some of them have overnight boarding or week-long boarding. Some of them have outdoor runs, some of them don't. We can define them separately, and for instance, allow a use that's entirely indoors that does not have any outdoor runs could be okay in more areas than the one that has outdoor runs. We can also deal with things regarding noise attenuation and things of that nature, because even barking dogs inside a building can be obnoxious, right? So we would envision that use being probably a conditional use, and then we could have conditions that said in this location, this is required, and this location is prohibited.
Just the day boarding where the dogs would be outside all day. I think that's the real concern. So thank you. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, so we're going through use by use like that, and we've run into these uses all over the country. Every city has the same issues, and so those uses that are commonly problematic, if you will, we're writing standards for them and not making them permitted by right, but they would be they could be administratively approved, subject to standards, or if they're onerous enough, they would actually require public hearing and conditional use.
Thank you, Brett. Councilmember Driscoll, then Milliman, and then me.
Yes, this is more for Kathleen. Kathleen, will there be an opportunity for citizens to give some guidance on what was presented tonight?
So we're going to continue to have the next building block conversation with neighborhoods. So that'll be the focus of our next studio. And then our hope is to take what we're learning and where we think we can take the code and have some of those conversations. So we're going to rely on a lot of partnerships that we have, utilize groups like, from everything from the task force that was focused on Columbine Square way back when to the group that's been working on short-term rentals. I'm thinking of other groups like the Housing Task Force, and really kind of tap as many as we can to have that conversation and talk conceptually about where we think we can go and get some feedback. So yes, that's a big focus for us between now and producing the draft on June 7th. We know that it picks up dramatically in June and July because we'll have actual language, right? We can say, so conceptually, here's what we tried to create. Here's what the language looks like. So we can kind of bring them along in that process because, as you all know, it's highly technical. So some of that conceptual conversation is much easier to get the kind of input we need to provide direction to Brett and bring back anything that we feel like we need council to be able to address and provide some additional direction to.
Great, thank you.
And we've already had 2 Envision studios for the corridor mixed use area as well. So we've had input up to now.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Milliman, then me, then Elrod.
Brett and Kathleen, thank you so much for the presentation tonight. I really do appreciate all your hard work in all of this. I want to quote policy number 3 from the land use and character section of the comprehensive plan. Quote, this policy is to create a regulatory framework that encourages development of diverse and attainable housing options in Littleton in terms of type, size, and cost to buyers and renters, end quote. So the Housing Task Force met last Tuesday. I unfortunately couldn't attend that meeting because of my new work schedule. But I did meet with them yesterday, and they're very, very concerned about the presentation that is being made with regards to the corridors. As you all know and recall, the BBC housing study from 2017, the data from that suggests that the city of Littleton is going to be short 6,500 plus housing units over the next 20 years. How we get those housing units in our community to meet those needs is in our corridors, right? It's in our corridors. And I too am a bit concerned that we could miss the mark on that. Some concerns that they have with regards to what's being presented now and what was being talked about initially early in the process. So opportunities for transit on demand. True transit on demand opportunities will come when much larger percentage of our built environment contains transit conducive developments, not reduced floor area ratio, height limits, increased open space requirements. We want more walkability, pedestrian access, reduced curb cuts. But what's being presented here, it looks like, or it seems, reduced in density, increased open spaces, which makes less walkable communities. Diversify revenue, that's very important to the survivability, the viability of our city, trying to reduce reliance on sales tax income. Population density equals revenue density, but we're talking about, it seems like this presentation might be talking about reducing density. Last thing too, growth, having smart growth, and it seems like it's inefficient land use, according to this presentation, continued auto dependence. And so I don't want to really dive into the weeds. I'm trying to keep it really high level. Me as a nurse who's not an urban land developer, real estate developer, I'm having trouble understanding what the presentation is showing us with regards to the corridors. I want to understand how what's being presented is in concert with the envision process and also meets the needs and the recommendations of the housing study. I mean, how are we going to have more housing? How are we going to have more diverse housing options at different price points? So this meets our values in the envision plan with making this a more inclusive community, a more walkable community, taking advantage of those transportation hubs in our city. And if we have less density, less residents, that means less diversified tax income and tax revenue. The other point that I wanted to make is I love the graphics that you have showing the different retail, commercial buildings. Would you please, I'm asking if you could please add in graphics that show multifamily housing. What would multifamily residential buildings with height look like? How is that being envisioned? I just think that I'm very concerned. I share the concerns of some of the members of the task force, the housing task force, that we could be missing a vital opportunity on bringing in more housing units into our community. So I think that's it. Thank you so much. I know that was a lot.
No, that's great.
I'm pretty passionate about this and would just love to see more discussion and also that the council has a thorough understanding that we know the decisions that we're making right now, what the consequences of those decisions could be going forward too as well. So thanks, Brett. Sorry.
Yeah, let me address that real quick if I might. So right now, a lot of the properties up and down all your corridors that are zoned commercial don't provide for any residential housing. we have changed that. We are proposing to change those to corridor mixed, which provides for housing. That can be in a number of different formats. That can be, apartments. That could be any type of residential unit you can think of. Townhomes, multiplexes, apartment complex, upper floor residential, retired, senior living, condo, no maintenance communities, all those types of things. So we are opening up acres and acres and acres of land within the city that can now be residential, that cannot today be residential. We're also providing standards that will make all these tracts a great deal more efficient. Today, they're very, very inefficient. When you think about, 70% of a lot is a parking lot, a parcel is a parking lot, and then you have a small building at the back of it. We can do so much better than that by getting so much more leasable square foot and dwelling units out of that property than what we've asked for and what we've received today. So when you look at a lot of these sites up and down and you see all these old strip centers and empty retailers and big boxes, we already know that there's people that are looking at redeveloping wholesale and getting, a lot more efficient in terms of their property. I'd encourage you to think more about what's on the screen today than what you see, where a lot of these, we can get hundreds, if not 1,000 units in even more than that in a development like this. We have to be careful that we can't, just mandate that there has to be a certain percentage of residential in every mixed use project, because you run into problems with, what the market will deliver, and then you end up varying it anyway. So you can utilize your economic model to help drive some of those decisions when these projects are coming in, to make sure that they're economically viable and they match up with the city's, future revenue forecasts. The other, it starts with creating land for residential. So we're creating land for residential. We're creating development opportunities that are a whole lot more efficient. And then, we haven't yet, but we can certainly incorporate, affordability requirements into the ordinance. That's done in, cities and counties across the U.S. So if that's something important to you, making sure that, there are housing units that, meet all variations of income.
Great.
So I hope that puts you a little bit into comfort. And as I said, this is an iterative process, so we keep building and adding more and more things to it. So I appreciate you bringing that concern up.
No, and I think it's hard to read those maps. It's really hard to decipher unless, you've got experience in that kind of, in that kind of a world. It's I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Well, it real quickly, essentially you can look at the maps that I had. These are the B2 properties. So you memorize that. Add the B3 properties, add the PD properties. So we can create a map that puts all of those together. So you pick up a lot of land that will be, corridor mixed, that provides for mixed use. And, you could limit the types of commercial uses and stuff, or just make darn sure that the problem that you sometimes see, and I think you've experienced this, is sometimes, they'll come in with one component of it, and then they won't ever get to developing the other component of it. So there has to be provisions in here to make sure that it's phased and that they're meeting their requirements.
All right. Thank you, Brett.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
And I'm up next, then Councilmember Elrod. And to Councilmember Milliman's point, we used to receive hard copies that were as big as a desk of drawings, and that was an easier thing to read, Kelly. So yeah, you're right. Looking at this little computer thing is not necessarily the most ideal thing. My comments only is regarding to the sustainability, primarily on the slide 24. I really appreciate you addressing that, of course, as we wanted you to. I like your optimism about the rainwater collectors. We don't get a heck of a lot of water here in Colorado, but when we do, it comes down in buckets. I didn't see anything about charging stations, and from what I understand, they're probably going to become more and more visible as time goes by here. So that's just something, if you could maybe work that into at some point, some plans at least. And the last one, as far as the plants, if we could, we do, and this is also for the city staff, is I think it's always good to have the native plants to Colorado. We have a tendency to put in some plants from other areas that require a substantial amount of water. And here in Colorado, we are arid, and we tend to make it more greener than it should be, as nice as it is. But water is a precious commodity here. So if you can, keep that in your design plans.
Yeah, we've got provisions on water-wise landscaping, utilizing, native vegetation. We've cited state law relative to, plant types that we do not want. We've created an appendix of preferred tree species, tree and shrub species that will be included in this as well. That is from a local Front Range source. Your electric vehicle parking will be basically a required percentage of parking lots that would be set aside for electric vehicles, those with plugins and so forth. So that is something that we've already thought about and are incorporating into the regulations.
Great. And just when I see all the green, and I'm assuming that's kind of a grass area, I'm not even sure that grass is native to Colorado when we bring in Kentucky bluegrass and other types of things like that. So I just want to keep in mind that we to preserve water as best we can.
Yeah, we'll have standards in here relative to irrigation and how they zone out these different areas, and making sure that they're not overwatering and watering parking lots and sidewalks and things like that. So we'll have standards in there to make sure that we are we're conserving water resources.
Great, thank you very much. We have Council Member Elrod and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation and the overview. That was very helpful to put some of what we read and see on paper with the context and words and the vision that you brought forward to us. So a couple of things that I want to point out as an opportunity. You talk about, so we have a list of new provisions that we're adding, including sustainability, as Mayor Valdez just mentioned. So another new provision that I think is very important to accomplishing some of the goals that in these corridors is the use of architecture, public art, creative spaces and experiences that help connect, between what might be parking lots, that help in defining a unique character for Littleton. When we think of, in particular, Littleton Boulevard, that is a great example of what could be a creative corridor district or gateway for our community for many reasons, but two in particular. That is the primary access point to our museum, to our library, to our Kettering Park, to our Littleton Historic District. It also spills into downtown. So consideration of art and design in those areas, I think, should be a provision within this. I think we can, that is also, very applicable to Broadway and Santa Fe, but in particular, it's very obvious and necessary on Littleton Boulevard. The second thing that I will, I think it's a question to confirm and then perhaps an ask. So given in this area, we're using the FAR measure different than what we did downtown. I believe there's no max lot size. And if there is no max lot size, that FAR can yield, very tall buildings. And it's not about saying that tall buildings are not okay. It's just, we can have a building. We have one in Littleton that just sticks out like a sore thumb because it's the tallest building in Littleton, and then everything else around it's only 2 stories. So any considerations on a maximum on lot size so that, the FAR stays within, reasonable character from a height perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. We got today the memo from the Director of Library and Museum Services relative to the funding of arts and culture. So I now have that in my possession. Public art has been or will be referenced throughout. We could certainly, draft standards relative to requirements for that, or you can use public art in lieu of XYZ. We are providing for what's on the screen right now. The little corner is kind of a public space that's tying 2 buildings together and creating a civic space and a gathering space and shade and things of that nature. So we are thinking about that so that sites are more pedestrian focused and creating reasons for them to be there and enjoyable places other than just walking in and getting in your car and leaving.
Yeah.
The FAR, you're right. I don't know whether we want to create a maximum lot size as much as maybe we want to create a maximum height, whatever that is. We're talking about utilizing a bulk plane. So if you can appreciate, basically, for every additional foot in height over a certain height, or for each, there has to be 1 additional foot of setback for each additional foot in height. So you get this, you get a plane, and that plane can be, whatever you want it to be. You can allow taller buildings or shorter buildings, but the idea is that at some point, 2 districts must come together, and some of those districts are single-family residential that are 2 stories, and so they have more reason to be concerned about what might be in near proximity to them relative to height. So that bulk plane would be a protective mechanism for them, but would not necessarily cap height unless we say, whatever it is, 8 stories, 10 stories, 6 stories. I look for direction from you as to capping a maximum height just so that it's within the realm of reasonableness for a suburban community like Littleton, so you don't have something that's entirely out of place.
Thank you for bringing
that's the reason for that.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up because I wasn't clear of what the bulk plane was. So does the bulk plane, I guess, measurement or however that works, could that, and does that also apply when we try to think about like site corridors? So it may not be that it's, bulk plane of how it aligns next to residential, but it might be certain, streets or walkways that might affect a site corridor. Could bulk plane be used to mitigate the effects of height in those areas?
In part, we envision having some view corridor provisions in here for site planning to make sure that we're siting buildings and being conscientious of, certain views of historic structures or whatever that might be. So that could be one avenue that through the site planning and design process that they could do to, maintain a view corridor. I think more important than that, it's just going to be, siting of the building on a property and the scale of the building and landscaping, other things like that can obscure view. So we'll have some provisions in this section on preserving view corridors.
Thank you. I have one more thing. This one's a little
Point
bit more.
of order, Mr. Mayor. Council member Elrod is on her 5th.
It's okay.
Question is that, are you going to allow that?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So this one is on outdoor storage. So we have that in places that we may not necessarily want. So if that could be relooked at, outdoor storage, one, it takes up a lot of space that could be used for residential, or outdoor storage right now is right next to our, is allowed, I believe it was one of the allowable uses around near the river. And again, we want to activate the river, not put a big warehouse. So if we can reconsider where the outdoor storage as a use truly is more applicable. Maybe it's industrial, I'm not sure. If we could just relook at that as where.
Yeah, it's in the presentation, Karina, because it's in your current ordinance. So that's why it was there. We're not advocating it. That's another one of those uses that would probably be a conditional use, and then there would be conditions relative to its location, its scale, whether or not it's permitted in certain districts, how it's screened, thinking about, water quality runoff and all those types of things. So, as you say, it's probably more appropriate in, areas, the business and employment areas that are coming up than it is along the corridors. But some uses that are permitted do need some amount of outdoor storage, but they can certainly be, treated well in terms of, screening and use of enclosing the space and all those types of things. So, yeah, outdoor storage isn't going to be just permitted carte blanche by any stretch.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Karina. All right, we'll go to Mayor Pro Tem, and then we'll start our second round with Grove after the Mayor Pro Tem. All right, Scott, you are up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to start by echoing the comments of Kelly and Karina and Jerry. I think those are all super important points. I think that ensuring the diversity and accessibility and adequacy of our future housing stock is a critical civic obligation of this and future councils. I think that any community that can emphasize public art is only enhancing the quality of life of its citizens. And I really want to thank the mayor for his comments on sustainability. I think you all know that's something that I get so excited about in imagining our future city. And Brett, thank you to your team for putting that in the presentation. I really, really appreciate that. The comment I want to make just goes back to an earlier thing you said, Brett, about sort of economic modeling. I know that we have the capacity through our economic development team in the city to sort of do that development or redevelopment by redevelopment or development one at a time. But I'm wondering, do we have any tools? Should we have any tools to, from the perspective of the entire city, ensure that we're looking out for the sustainability, the viability, the thriving of the city's future general fund? In other words, is there something we can do to make sure that citywide, the corridors as a whole are getting us the revenues that we need? Because, I think a point that the city manager has made before is that for now, our general fund is healthy, but it's showing some signs of stress, and we need to be attentive to that. So I want to make sure that we don't, if we end up as a wealthy community, we haven't just happened into that. Wealthy in the sense that we have businesses here that are generating sales tax revenues, and that those are coming to the city. I'd like it to be deliberate and planned and so on.
Kathleen may be able to
Yeah,
that.
I'll just weigh in real quickly. I know we've talked about the economic model for a few years with council about what we hope to achieve with that. And the reality is that we have a really strong project-specific fiscal model that we're starting to utilize project by project. And that's an incredible tool for us to be able to look at a very sort of microscopic way to understand the dynamics of a project. In addition to that model, we are building a long-term fiscal health model. So this is the one that we're starting to receive parts of and starting to vet along with the financial conversations that we're having internally with the city. So this one will help us determine, Scott, at a very broad level, if we had additional revenue tools, if we had levers to push and pull, what would that look like for that long-term fiscal health? Would we be healthy? Would we see signs of greater stress? And so what I've talked with Brett about is when we come back and brief you again on our progress, specifically on the neighborhoods block, that we can bring some of those pieces as part of that conversation. So we can say kind of, downtown, the corridors, the neighborhood pieces all combined. What's that going to mean for the overall fiscal health? We'll still have that remaining building block of business and commercial areas, but I think that it'll be the right opportunity for council to see that broader picture and weigh in with some of that policy direction. So that's our hope at this point. But I think it's really important for council to understand that while you may start to see that project-specific fiscal impact model in some of your conversations, similar to how Planning Commission just used it as part of their work on a project, this is going to be something different and will allow that much bigger picture perspective on the overall health financially of the city. Mark, did you want to add anything on that? Sorry, go ahead.
Mayor, if I may, just quickly, I think Kathleen kind of shared a lot of conversations that staff has been having in part with Brett. In fact, we have this tentatively on the council's retreat here in early February to kind of update you on that. So I think Kathleen has probably dug into this pretty deep already here, but we are pretty excited about to share with council kind of the intent of that. And remember, ever since I've been here as the city manager, the council's talked about how we wanted to be more of a data-driven organization. And so that clearly is the intent. We're trying to build something that creates that model so that we can have data that helps us make decisions in the long run.
Yeah, thanks. That sounds like a super exciting tool. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And then before we do it, we're going to go second round here with a few more questions. And Mark, you had your hand up. Did you, city manager, do you want to say something?
I did. I just need to take my hand down. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We'll go to Councilmember Grove, then me.
A couple comments and question on Littleton Boulevard. I was thrilled to see, Brett, that you had this overlay district and multi-purpose district and kind of cognizant of trying to preserve the mid-modern history. That's just wonderful. Have you thought about how that would look, or is that still kind of up for discussion? When I was on HPB, Historical Preservation Board, we talked about having micro districts. Landmarking is tough. For somebody to landmark their property, process isn't tough. It's just kind of the commitment. It's kind of hard. And we still need to get out this study and have people, really understand the gems that they have. So how do you perceive that to kind of happen, or is it still in the infant stages?
Well, we provided the mechanism to establish a conservation district. I see the boundaries of that probably being determined, maybe by staff, just because of the work that's been done and their, more local knowledge. We have had some, very brief conversation with staff that we want to make sure that the conservation district is used properly and is not abused in the future and used for spot zoning on individual lots and things like that. So I want to make sure that it's of a minimum size and includes certain things so that it's used properly. The idea is that there would, there's building inside design standards that are kind of the foundation that cut across the whole community. And then there's particular areas like downtown and like Littleton Boulevard that need their own special treatment. And so we could do that through this conservation district that will overlay that. So I would envision, the work that's been done with the inventory of the survey could kind of serve as a plan, and then there will need to be, some particular design standards apply to help conserve those properties. We've also, I don't know whether this is the right place or whether it's historic preservation, but I don't believe you have any standards right now for what's my word? Tearing down.
Demolition.
Demolition. We think that the conservation district could bring that in, but we're going to be rewriting the historic preservation regulations and pulling them out of the city code and bringing them into the ULUC. At least that's the plan, and then rewriting them. That'll be an opportunity for us to cross that bridge and look at kind of state of affairs and kind of state of practice, best practices of what should be or could be done for historic preservation in Littleton.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Another, I think, very quick question is you talked about converting Littleton Boulevard from commercial suburban to this general business neighborhood, and I can't find it in the comp plan. Is that new?
It's not. The comp plan just shows Littleton Boulevard as being corridor mixed.
Okay.
And then suburban commercial is down around the intersection of South Broadway and
Mineral.
Mineral, excuse me. I don't think suburban commercial is right with the understanding that, that area is suburban commercial. So it may be that it could be considered that maybe there's a plan amendment if you think that's necessary, or, we just tie that back to the plan of saying due to the uniqueness of the Littleton Corridor District that we're defining, this neighborhood business district.
So it's a new definition. A new definition is what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I think it deserves its own designation just for obvious reasons.
And the last thing I wanted to bring up is, as I'm hearing Scott talk about our concern for our tax base and hearing Kelly talk about affordable housing and multifamily, how do we reconcile that with corridors using space for residential instead of our commercial? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know what the balance is and how we do that, but it's just something I pose.
Well, I think the code could basically say that mixed use, must have residential component and must have commercial component. You can't do one without the other and have mixed use. And then you could apply the fiscal model as a condition of approval of that to make sure that their master development plan is, meeting your expectations in terms of the revenue generation and the number of units, affordable and otherwise. The zoning is the place to create the opportunity for these things. Then there's the implementation side of it, which is not as much on the zoning side as it is, through your site plan review and through applying your fiscal model.
And last thing, sorry, and then I'm really done. I like the idea of making sure what Karina was talking about, that somehow height, or if we use bulk or whatever it is, make sure it fits in with the neighborhood. Not that we don't have height, not that, again, height is bad. I agree with Karina, but it just fits in, that there's not something that just kind of sticks up and it blends. So keep the character, which is what we heard a lot of in the Envision studios.
That's the value of the bulk plane, because instead of saying this district is 3 stories, this district is 6 stories, obviously that district goes through other districts that is in close proximity to those. So if you just apply a bulk plane, it says wherever that condition exists, then this is how you deal with it. So it can kind of apply across the board.
Yes,
so that's the beauty in the bulk plane.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me.
I'm up next, and then it'll be Council Member Fay and then Milliman. And then by that time, we'll be pretty close to our time, but we still have about 10 minutes left. Again, just a few comments, Brett. Let's see, for Littleton Boulevard being the gateway from Broadway, I really want to make sure we're doing something there and as Councilmember Elrod had brought that up and reminded me that we really need to have some sort of markers there to really say, hey, this way to the heart of our city. So if we could do something there. And I'm so glad Councilmember Elrod brought that up, because it gives me a chance to bring up the arch or something at Broadway and Littleton Boulevard. So thank you for reminding me that, Karina. Another thing is that currently, Littleton Boulevard and the northeast part of Broadway is definitely not pedestrian or bicycle friendly. And so if we could keep that in mind as we're going forward. I also want to make sure that we are somehow highlighting those mid-century or mid-modern buildings that we have on Littleton Boulevard. If we could somehow really find a way to highlight that and make that a part of what Littleton is and was during the 50s and early 60s. And let's see, last but not least, and this is something that we so often sort of overlook, the northeast portion of Broadway, say from Cayley to almost Littleton Boulevard. There's a housing stretch right through there. There are well-built houses. There's just not a whole lot of them. There's maybe 3 blocks of them there. I would really like to make sure that we keep those in the plan, that we just don't sort of brush over them, because there's other areas. So I would really like it if you could take a hard look at that. That's it. And to the east, of course, would be predominantly it's the car dealerships, but there's the homes to the west side. So if you could somehow keep that into your plan.
Keep them at residential, you mean?
I would hope so.
Yeah. Okay.
Or whatever else you might come up with, but that's what I would hope for. Again, we so often just brush over that area. With that, we will go to Councilmember Fay and then Milliman.
Brett, this has to do with roof slopes. I noticed on the Envision Studio one that the polling was very much in favor of sloped roofs. And then in the second Envision, it wasn't so much in favor of sloped roofs, even though it may have been pretty much the same folks.
I didn't hear what you said. What groups, Carol?
Never mind that last, but that doesn't really matter. And then in your slides, there was a slide that pointed out sloped roofs. And then the one right after that, at the center of the slide, is a building that didn't have sloped roofs, except for the very front part. But it was a sizable building that was mostly flat roofs. So what I'm trying to get at here is, where are we on sloped roofs?
Good point. Well, I think, in downtown, we basically required certain percentages of elevations to be sloped roofs and things like that. There's a number of different ways that we can deal with sloped roofs. They're pretty easy on smaller buildings. On buildings that span a lot of square footage, they're more difficult, but you can use, a sloped roof as a parapet and other things so that it gives the appearance of a sloped roof. So I think to me, sloped roofs relate to more of that small town character rather than having a lot of big square boxes and flat roofs. So I could see there being some combination within mixed use, areas, but I foresee sloped roofs being kind of a key aspect with respect to building design in a lot of these, corridor areas. So we'll be addressing roads and roof pitch, roof materials in this as well.
Thank you.
We have Councilmember Milliman and then Elrod, and then Council will be right on our time. So Councilmember Milliman.
So Brett, two comments. One's a request. Is there any way that you could provide me some kind of visual that shows where residential development opportunities lie within the corridors? Just something that I can really that's more simplified and visual. I think that'd be cool. And maybe share it with the rest of council if they're interested in seeing it or not.
And
I appreciate
City
that.
Manager, I would suggest we get Kelly, really, one of the rollout drawings that we have, because I think that to give her a visual, I think that would really be helpful. I totally understand your concern there, Kelly.
But specifically showing me where residential developments can go, whether they're in the quarter mixed use or in the, wherever. That would be super, super helpful.
Be more than happy to.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. My lady eyes really appreciate that. Thank you.
I think having those drawings, Kelly, would help you out tremendously.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And
Anything else?
Yes. One other thing I wanted to say, Brett, I do agree with you. I don't think it's so much about, I think that what we're trying to do is create really good code that encourages, that allows for more diverse developments, specifically for diverse housing options. So I really appreciate that we're going through this exercise. Very, very important to me and to the city as a whole. So thank you.
Great. Uh-huh.
All right. And we're going to end with Councilmember Elrod. Councilmember Elrod, I know when you were on Planning Commission, you dealt with those larger drawings.
Oh, they were beautiful. I love them.
Yeah, they're so much better than that tiny little 9-inch screen or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
You're up.
Okay. So there's actually a section here on plan development, and it speaks to modification and termination. So it's saying PDs are going to continue for a reasonable period of time. That we're going to establish sunset provisions, a process to amend or terminate. So typically when we adopt code and boom, done. This day forward. Maybe why are we doing this, or why is this necessary? What's the context?
So PDs are adopted by ordinance and subject to a PD plan that went along with that. So those are already authorized, so they have vested rights. So we can't just pull the carpet out from underneath of them after they've already, they built all their pro formas and they built their future plans on what the council has approved. So the idea is that when they come in for redevelopment, the redevelopment will be guided by the ULUC, and they will not need a planned development to achieve what they'll be able to achieve by the base districts. And so over time, as they may clamor seeing the unified look code and saying, wow, that provides us a lot more than what we've been able to do to point, yet we're happy to get rid of the PD because the code helps us do what we want to do. So they may volunteer to come in and rezone the property and go through that process. Anybody comes in for a major plan amendment, like a PD plan amendment, that would not be approved. That plan amendment would have to be brought underneath the ULUC. So the long and short of it is PDs are a pain in the rump. They cost a lot of time, a lot of money on everybody's behalf. They're very difficult, and you don't get any consistent outcomes because it's based upon the plan that they submit to you and you ultimately approve. Where the code will deliver, very deliberate outcomes based upon the character of the area. So ultimately, we'd like to see them go away. We'll set a sunset in there of after X years, they sunset, but we would anticipate that they will kind of self-correct themselves.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
All right. Thank you. And I think that'll be our last question, Council, unless anybody else has one they're burning to tell us right now. I think Kathleen would like to make a comment, then back to the city manager.
Yeah, I'd just like to take an opportunity to just summarize what we heard tonight, because I think that'll just be helpful as we've got, so much volume and you guys are absorbing this so well. So thank you for that. But just quickly, overall, I think when Brett was presenting, he did a great job of presenting the problem we're really trying to solve here. Our current code does not provide deliberate direction, and we're limited as to achieving those overarching and aspirational goals in the comprehensive plan. He also pointed out that we're looking to achieve that one-to-one relationship with the future land use and character map. We did talk about one of those exceptions in not being able to see that neighborhood business district. So we'll work to try and communicate through that. We heard a definition for walkability, and did also hear that that's going to be a common thread, as the goal is to make portions of the city more walkable. We did also hear about the animal treatment and boarding centers, wanting to see a greater buffer and consider how those are incorporated into other parts of the city. We did hear the desire to take this back out and continue to get more input on the direction for the corridors and mixed use. Heard concerns from Councilmember Milliman and the Housing Task Force, reminder of that goal of trying to achieve the 6,550 housing units, and work towards better graphics that can kind of show that multifamily and height. I think this speaks to the last comment of wanting that visual of where there are opportunities, being able to see that on a map of where the big opportunities for that are. We also got some feedback that some of the maps were used in the studio were hard to read and decipher. I think we can work to create better visuals, and that we're looking at these provisions to kind of phase in that and get towards mixed use overall. We heard feedback relative to sustainability on charging stations. Our plan is to incorporate that with a percentage of parking lots, an emphasis on native plants, really reflecting our arid climate. We also heard public art and its importance. Brett does have that memo from the Littleton Arts and Culture Commission, so we'll look at ways to incorporate that. We did have some conversation tonight. I bet we'll be back to talk about maximum lot size, maximum height, bulk plane. I think that will continue to be something that we'll look for additional guidance from you, and we'll be able to have some other conversations. You did hear tonight that there are provisions for view corridors, similar to how we approached that with downtown. We had the request to relook at storage and make sure that we're incorporating sort of beyond what the current code accomplishes, but take that a little bit further. I think overall themes tonight: housing, public art, sustainability, definitely that economic modeling. The tools that we've created as the city, I think, are to be huge in the decision-making process and the policy direction from council. So our plan, again, is to hopefully incorporate that into our next update on March 23rd and bring that back to help enrich that conversation for you. We had some more conversation about Littleton Boulevard, the potential of a conservation overlay district. So we look forward to kind of fleshing that out further, adding aspects to the historic preservation code, things along the lines of recognizing demolition, and the ability to sort of control that better, generally exploring that neighborhood business district, general neighborhood business district, as opposed to trying to fit that commercial mixed use corridor that we had in the comprehensive plan, give a little bit more uniqueness to places like Littleton Boulevard. We also heard, and I think we'll be back, how we create this balance between commercial and housing. We have competing goals. Every city has them. We're not unique in that, but we're going to have to figure out where that magical balance is. And we have a particular challenge that we're going to have both short-term balance issues and long-term balance issues. So I think that'll be something that will come back as well. We also heard feedback on height and considering how that fits in. And then the mayor brought up the homes along Broadway on the northeast part, some attention to those so that we can bring some greater clarity back to you. Questions from Councilmember Fay about roof slope, how that gets applied. I think you'll continue to see that evolve, and we look forward to kind of circling back with you on that direction as well. And then obviously I'll just reemphasize that request for a map or visual. And then the last piece was dealing with the plan developments. Is that delay necessary? We are dealing with properties that have vested rights. I think in the end, we're all hoping that these base districts and how we have the ULUC pulled together, particularly on the corridors, is that they'll see it's better too. So, but that's just kind of a quick summary. So thank you, Mayor Valdez, for letting me just run through that, and really appreciate all the feedback tonight.
Excellent. Council, is that, did that get your concerns out there? Anything get missed? Good. Good. I'm seeing some thumbs up. That's great. Thank you very much, Kathleen.
One little one. And all that title list that was fabulous was the gateway idea and the markers.
Oh, yes. I have it written down.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you got
it. I was like trying to speak to you, but also read my notes furiously. Yes, thank you.
Great summary. I think that was just a little important.
Yes. Well, and that gateway piece is a major theme throughout the history of planning in Littleton. There's always been that emphasis on that. And I think that fits in the public art piece, but there are other ways that we can approach that as well throughout the entire code. So thank you very much, Councilmember Grove.
Great
and that councilmember, the gateway that I mentioned, also we need something at the other end of Bowles too, to tie it all in together. This is Littleton, that you are the city of Littleton. So many people think they live in Littleton.
Yes.
So great. Thank you very much for that. City manager, would you like to close it out for us?
Really nothing else. I think Kathleen kind of hit the topics that I was hoping we would. So thank you.
Well done. Well done. Well, with that, Brett, thank you very much for the presentation. It was well done. And if we can get, if we can get some maps or some draft sheets over to Kelly, I think she will greatly appreciate that. So thank you very much, Brett.
I'd like to see them too.
Appreciate all of you.
Yeah.
Can you give the maps to everybody?
And if anybody else would like to see those, just why don't you email Mark, the city manager, and he can get those to you. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Council, can we go ahead and move on to the next item? Okay, great. It is 8:13. So our next item, Council, is ID, well, it's under 1B on our agenda, and it's ID number 21-011, short-term rental update and 2021 strategy. And on this one, Council, staff will give us an update on the progress. And let's see, they will, hang on, I got the wrong, let me get over here. Yeah, there we go. I've got to get my notes here in order. Staff is going to give us a complete list of the issues and the question that council wants to have addressed. This is going back, now a couple months. We were last discussed this in November is when it was a big deal. At that time to get these items out there. So staff did make a list. They're working on that. So we're going to hear what that list is, council. So we want to make sure that items that are especially important to you individually, make sure that they do get out there one way or another. We're going to talk about staff is going to walk us through the short-term rental strategy for 2021. And let's see, in council, we're probably, what we need to do is confirm that the list is complete. So like I said, make sure that your items are on there, or at least bring them up at the very least. We're not here to change and negotiate a lot of stuff here. We just want to make sure we get this list complete. Let's see, council, we're going to need to make, or probably we're going to be addressing some modifications on the business licenses too. We're not going to be doing that tonight, but that's going to be a big issue that we're going to have to address here in the future. And I'm thinking, however, after talking with the city manager and the city attorney earlier, that we probably won't get to those kind of things until late summer or fall. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager, Mark Ralph. And Mark, if you could, or you or Reed, or our city attorney, if you could, please just tell the council and also our audience how the short-term rentals relates to the ULUC, and to some degree that the ULUC is actually kind of leading the way. But if you can tell the importance, because we often hear that, well, that'll be addressed in the code. And if you could just maybe make that clearer for us.
Be happy to, Mayor.
Thank you.
I will make an introduction here. I may look to read to see if I've missed anything, and maybe after that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Henninger, who's going to make a presentation here tonight. So yes, Mayor, thank you. It is our intent here as staff to share with you a list of questions to make sure that we've captured all the issues that you would like us to address as we move through the short-term rental code process here. So back in November, of course, the council passed an ordinance here that put licensing in place for the first time. And so now staff here for the next few months is trying to take that ordinance and put it into practice. And so we have to develop the processes and integrate it into the software systems of the city. And so we'll have that up and running here by spring. And certainly staff can talk more detail about that if you're interested. And so tonight here really is about making sure that we've captured these issues here. It is our intent to run a process in parallel to the ULUC. And so as we move closer towards June and through all this public process in the next several months, we're going to be gathering information about certain kinds of broad topics. Certainly the different kind of zoning districts and what might be allowed. We're going to have a pretty robust conversation about accessory dwelling units. All of these kinds of pieces will kind of add to the short-term rental discussion here. So it is staff's intent to take this feedback from the ULUC and about summertime is actually meet with council through a series of study sessions here to identify kind of the key issues that are left here. And then ultimately kind of work on this code issue here for short-term rentals and bring it back in the end to link up and sync with the ULUC. And so that clearly is the intent. We have got a pretty heavy workload getting this ULUC here through the next several months. Layered on top of that, of course, is all the work that we're doing here for downtown and specifically our historic district. So our staff is very committed just from a capacity standpoint in trying to move forward here with the ULUC and all kind of the related issues. So with that, Reed, have I missed anything maybe from your perspective you'd like to add before we turn it over to Jennifer?
No, I think that's a good summary. I think we should let Jennifer lead us home.
Okay, so with that, Jennifer.
Excellent. Let's see. Can you guys see the presentation?
That and then some. We see.
There we go. Yeah. So as Mark stated, the purpose of this evening is really to go over what we have heard from you council members as well as the public so far on the short-term rentals. I'm going to go over briefly what we already have addressed that is in our existing licensing regulations, kind of the time frame that we're looking at to integrate everything into our systems and make it all systems go, if you will. And then go over, again, the timeline that we've set out for the short-term rental strategy. So what I would like to do, Mayor, if it's okay with you, is run through the 8 slides that I do have that will cover, again, what I just stated. And then I'll be looking for guidance on 3 items at the end, and I'll take questions during that time. Does that work for you?
Great. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, so again, discussing what we already have adopted, review what we have heard, and how we're going to integrate what we've heard into the ULUC, and then the strategy and confirmation. So in terms of our newly adopted licensing regulations, if you'll recall in November, we adopted those new regulations. We added definitions for short-term primary and short-term non-primary. We introduced the concept of a short-term business license. So we now have a specific license. We adopted a fee that is an application fee as well as a $200 annual fee that we did not have before. We have parking requirements. We also set a maximum occupancy. We established the good neighbor handout and letter, and then we have grounds for denial and revocation. So what we have heard and have been addressed, this is what this slide is about. So in terms of licensing, we now, again, have that short-term rental license, the annual renewal, limitation of licenses per applicant. We address special events, limitation on the total number of licenses. There is none at this time. Residency requirements. We differentiated between primary and non-primary, the definition, additional notification for surrounding property owners. As you'll recall, that was something that was brought up during our business license regulations. So that was addressed. We also have started to address the grandfathering, and we will look at that further. Licensing in terms of transferring, we have language in our current business regulations now addressing that. And also inspections, and attached in your council packets, you will see the checklist that we have developed since adoption of the business regulations. So that is something that we are integrating into basically an electronic system for this process with a go live of March 31st. We also have the penalties for not meeting any aspects of the business licensing now. What we have heard and will be addressing in the ULUC is the focus of this slide. So some questions that we are going to be asking ourselves and seeking council input as well as public input during the next few months. And that's, what zone districts should STRs be allowed? Are we going to have owner occupied in residential zones, or can it be something else? Should we limit the location of non-owner occupied STRs? How many of them could be on a block or not? Is it considered an overnight accommodation or a home occupation? If they're non-conforming STR considerations, do we allow STRs in ADUs? Also having clarifying definitions and addressing legal non-conforming uses. And something that I need to stress here is these are all questions that we are going to flesh out and get input on. No decisions have been made on these. And that is the purpose of us running this process parallel with the ULUC. These are items that do still need to be addressed and are important to both STR as well as ULUC and tie together very nicely. So focus items on the ULUC, and the list that we just went over does that. This breaks it out a little bit further, and you'll see what I would call focus groups, or focus areas forming on this that will have very specific questions that we'll be asking. So establishing what types, regulate where they're appropriate, are they accessory uses, and then addressing the process. So in terms of the strategy that we like to set forth in a timeline, this slide addresses that. As you will recall, we did adopt the business regulations in November. We're here at the study session asking for confirmation on direction. And really in January and March is when you are going to see us reaching out to the public and asking City Council for direction on items. And this is when we as staff are continuing our process of adopting those checklists, integrating it into our T9 system, establishing and reaching out to all of our current STR owners to make sure that they get in this renewal process. Because what we're trying to do is have all 47 of our STRs be on the same renewal timeline, and that be happening. It would be happening in the first quarter of every year. And then January to May, again, developing these new STR regulations in parallel with the ULUC process. We're looking at adoption of the ULUC in October. And at that time, anything on the list that I've just gone through that we feel has not been addressed via the ULUC or the business licensing that we have adopted this past November, that's when we're going to go through that reconciliation process and make sure that we have addressed everything. And it is our hope and goal that all of that occurs prior to a new council coming in November. We would like you as this council to be able to finalize this conversation, if you will, in regards to STR. So with that, these are the three things that I'm looking for you, from you, council, is number one, confirmation that the questions and feedback that I went through in this presentation that we have addressed or have heard and taken note of things that we need to address in either the ULUC or the business license. So I'm going to go back to those, maybe. And we'll take questions on that. So have we heard everything?
Great, council. We have Councilmember Driscoll.
Thanks, Jennifer. The limitation of license per applicant. I thought we set a limit. One owner, one non-owner. Is that anybody else's understanding, or did I mean, can a corporation come in and own 10 short-term rentals, or are we gonna say no because they're not a citizen of Littleton?
I'm gonna let Reed address that one.
The answer to your question is no, we did not limit it at this time to a number of applicants. So whether it be a corporation or an individual, they could certainly have more than one STR at this point.
Okay. Council Member Elrod Grove.
I think the only thing that I'm not seeing on here that was brought up before was the occupants. So we landed on 8, but I believe that direction was given to us based on with the statement that that was the direction of the short-term rental group, but then there was emails that we had received saying no, that wasn't our recommendation. So there was a lot of discussion at the tail end around what the intended and recommended number of occupants were that we were going to relook at. So that's the only one that I see missing that had kind of come up on more than one occasion and not fully resolved. And I remember, as Pat did, that this number of licenses that there was intent to limit. So we may have to figure out how to do that, but I do think that still needs to be a conversation potentially.
Great, thank you. We have Councilmember Grove.
Couple things. On the slide there, the limitations of license per applicant, we have none. I'd like to see that considered for future updates. Also on the type of license. So not only the number, but the type. And then this is a question. I'm not advocating, I just don't know. We had talked about additional uses that were prohibited. Just putting limiting special events and no additional guests, is that enough to limit things like corporate events or meetings or that kind of stuff? Does that need to be looked at and broadened, or do you think that that's enough?
Hey.
I don't know. Is that a Reed question?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Reed, are you available?
Sure. Yeah, I would say the current language within the business licensing ordinance in terms of the limitation on multiple uses is we say during any rental period, the short-term rental should not be used for any purpose, e.g. home-based business, temporary event, etc., by the renter or owner other than for lodging purposes. Further on in the ordinance somewhere, I know that we have talked about not having special events. I will take another look. It's been a while since I think I've repressed most of this ordinance. So let me take another look and see if we feel comfortable from an enforcement perspective. That really, if someone is renting out to someone that the purpose of it is lodging. It's residential. It's staying there for a night, not having, some corporate event. So let me make sure that we're comfortable with the enforcement language there.
And then this is another question. Do we need to get into the nitty gritty? I'm not sure. I'm just asking how much you own of that property. So you can't have, if we do limit number of licenses, you can't have 50% here and 25% there. Is that something we need to address at all, or is that getting too granular?
I think there may be some legal ramifications to that, but
we can certainly look into it. If it's council's direction at some point going forward that we need to limit a particular type of license, then we can certainly take a look at having kind of a base ownership percentage or a limitation on whatever ownership you have in various properties. We can certainly explore that.
Okay, I didn't know that was one thing the coalition had talked about. I'm really excited to see that we are looking at types of STRs by districts. Question, I think this is Jennifer questions. What's non-conforming STR consideration and what's legal non-conforming uses? I just didn't know what those were.
so a lot of our non-conforming ones are obviously STRs that either shouldn't be there or no longer meet the requirements. We can assist on this one too, and then legal non-conforming would be at the time that the STR license was issued, it met all the requirements. So therefore, it's considered legal non-conforming until changed.
Okay, all right. And last comment, and that'll be it, is I remember we talked about the 8 versus 12, and I think we were at a study session, and I think we took an informal support, not support, and I think we had some marginal support, somewhere around 4 or 5 people that wanted to keep it at 8, as I remembered. I don't know exactly which meeting it was. That doesn't mean it's not worth revisiting. It's just that's where we did kind of have a conclusion, as I remember it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. I think that's a good list. The only thing I think might need to be added on the point of enforcement is who actually is going to make those decisions. I think we had talked at one point, Reed, about an administrative law judge for the city. I think that mechanism needs to be put in place.
Yeah, generally most of the business licensing goes through our finance department. One of the things in taking a look through our code that probably needs to be fleshed out a little bit more is a kind of a public hearing process. While we talk about a lot of reasons why you can be denied this particular license, an STR license, or why it can be suspended or revoked, we don't really have, at least in this ordinance, built out kind of that process, what an applicant or one of those folks' rights are to appeal if for some reason they're denied a license. And so that's something I'm going to be working on with Tiffany to make sure that she's comfortable with kind of the licensing public hearing, if you will. But we really should have kind of a standalone section within our code anyways for public hearing. So something that will be coming. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Council Member Milliman.
Just one quick comment too. I agree with Karina. I'd like to see the maximum number of occupants in an STR at 12. So I just wanted to voice that support for that.
All right, thank you. All right, City Manager, I think we took care of number 1. That the list seems to be in pretty good shape there. So the other one was the proceed with the land use items related to the short-term rental, that item. What are you looking for there? Proceed.
Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Why don't you bring up, carry on the conversation there. Pick up the next point, please.
Yes. So we are looking for confirmation of the timeline that we have set forth. I'd be happy to share that again. Hang on one second.
And if you don't mind, Mayor, let me add a little bit more commentary to that once Jennifer brings that up, just for clarity purposes.
Sure. Okay, I'm looking at slide 7. Seems to be where we want. There you go.
Yep. Hang on.
There you go.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think the point here that I just want to make sure is clear is that when the draft of the ULUC comes out on June 7th, it is not going to have a draft of STR regulations. It's just not possible for us to do that. There's too many pieces that the council has to provide direction on that's really outside of the scope of the ULUC. And so that's why we're suggesting here is that we collect this information from the ULUC, the public information, here over the next several months. And then over the course of the summer, bring that to the conversation and take on that list that Jennifer just shared. So I hope that's a little added value here for clarification.
Thank you.
Yes,
All right.
and we'll be asking for those additional study sessions to work with council on that.
Great.
So
All right.
again, looking for confirmation, everyone is good with the timeline that we have set forth.
If you could pull, like, I can't see the council. If you could, there we go. Councilmember Elrod.
I think that's very solid. The only caution that I have on the focus items for the ULUC is the item where, number of STRs per a block or per a particular area. I am a little cautious of how we would administer that, the complexity of it, and the unintended consequences of that. So I almost would rather say, let's not put that forward if executing on that is not necessarily viable or appropriate. So again, our intent is how do we limit? I don't know that particular, it's not a recommendation, it's an option. I don't know that option is one that we may want to take on as Littleton. So just caution of, to what degree we're putting something out there that we can't fulfill or shouldn't fulfill.
Great. I'll go next. And kind of along those lines of when we do get around to amending the existing ordinance to include some of these things that we would like to see in there. City Attorney, when do you think that will take place? In the fall?
Yeah, I think, we're going to have the draft done with the ULUC. What was it? The timeline was June is when we'll start having kind of those discussions as a whole. And
Correct.
I think, around that time, we'll be in a position, and obviously the ULUC is going to take a lot of your attention as we go towards the finish line with the ULUC and try to make sure that gets adopted before November. But to answer your question, Mayor, I would say, probably the fall would probably be the time in which to take a look at the business licensing aspects, unless something really obvious and hopefully really simple comes out during kind of the ULUC process. That's probably where I would peg it, I suppose.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so if we don't have any issues, council, then we'll just ask staff to proceed. Okay, good enough. We are down to our third item, any additional business licensing modifications in the third quarter.
I believe Reed just updated that. But one thing that I would like everybody to keep in mind as we go through the ULUC, again, it is our top priority. We want to see how much we can address that is still, quote unquote, outstanding in relation to STR and the ULUC prior to us going back to any business regulations. But what is really important is that we'd like to kind of deliver everything as a package, if you will, in terms of STR and changing anything in regards to the application process and tie it all so we can introduce it and let our applicants know, hey, these are the changes that have happened. They're going to now take effect in first quarter of 2022. So there is a timing that goes with this. And that's why we have laid out the timeline that we have. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
All right.
Mayor, if I may, can I just quickly summarize kind of what we've heard this evening? Hold on
Well, on this
second.
third item, though, I don't, council, did you have any concerns or no problems? Good. Great. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It depends on the summary.
Sure.
So give the summary first, and we'll see if it.
Excellent.
Well, we have already agreed that we can move forward with the first two.
Correct.
Okay.
And
so you're going to summarize the third one then?
Well, I'm going to summarize what we've heard, and then we can make a decision on the business license. But basically, what the direction we're hoping on the business license is, we wait until after the ULUC to see what we've been able to address in that process, and then reconcile everything if needed, probably September. That's what we're going for. So in terms of what I heard this evening is that we might have a potential for further limitations on the number of occupants, kind of look at that conversation again, the number of licenses that an applicant can have, the types of licenses that an applicant can have, and any uses that we want to prohibit, such as a special event or corporate meetings or anything, that we look a little bit further into that. Also look at the base ownership. Is there a percentage that we want to initiate in this process? Also fleshing out, as Reed said, kind of that standalone public hearing process of how we would enforce a lot of the items that we're introducing in the short-term rental, as well as other things in the code. So we'll look at that. We also heard kind of a caution as we go through the ULUC that maybe not do a number per block. So we'll take a look at that. And I would say those are the ones that I've heard. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it.
Excellent. So we will be back to you. This, don't fear, you will be able to have input on this. And just listening to your comments on the ULUC, I commend you for being as interested as you are in this process. It is critically important, all of this. But as Kathleen stated, we have a lot on our plate, all in service to our community. And so please be patient, but engaged. So thank you.
Great, thank you. To the city manager.
Nothing on that topic, Mayor, but I do have some updates if we're ready for the administrative.
Yeah, if we have nothing else on that topic, council, we're going to go ahead and move on to, should we go to our reports? And let's go to city manager.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of topics here. I had sent the council a memo here last week on the omnibus and how we might approach a contract with VIA. If you remember, we had a study session and talked about how we may be looking to contract the service. The issue I raised is that our contractor VIA was looking at maybe raising the age to 70 instead, 60 instead of 55, but grandfather in those customers that we have currently. And what I've heard from council is support. I didn't necessarily hear from all of council, but I just want to reaffirm, if there was an issue, to please let me know. Otherwise, we're going to structure a contract around that concept. Okay, the second piece I'd like to talk about here is just a quick update on the 5-star certification program here with the state and with Arapahoe County. So just some quick statistics here. We've had to date here about 22 applications. 13 of them have been approved. We have 6 currently scheduled for inspection, and then we have another 3 that are actually waiting in the queue here for inspection, for a total, again, of 22 applications. We haven't had anybody fail an inspection to this point. And just as a reminder, in order for these businesses, once they are approved, to take advantage of this is we have to have Arapahoe County within the orange level metrics for a minimum of 7 days. And we have not reached that point. So in essence, these people are putting themselves, their business in position so that once we do hit that threshold, that they're ready to take advantage of a higher occupancy. So that's a quick update on the 5-star certification. Unless there's any questions, I'm going to move on to vaccines.
Well, I think the thing to be clear on there is I think a lot of us got pretty excited about the 5-star program getting ready to fire up. But at this point, looks like it's going to be delayed getting approval to move forward with that program.
Yeah, I think when the governor, this is my opinion for what it's worth, but I think when the governor at the same time kind of dropped the level from red to orange here on occupancy, I think that gave all of our businesses a little bit of breathing room. And so I think that at the same time, then a little bit more manageable time to apply for the certification and just position themselves. So I think that's why it perhaps hasn't taken off quite to the level that at least I thought it might.
Well, I guess what I was saying as far as actually being able to move forward with the actual program and opening up to businesses, that I think at this point we don't have the numbers that we need to have to actually move forward with the program.
Correct. Yeah, the pandemic metrics are just not there. We're not ready.
Councilmember Elrod.
So when these businesses go to the 5-star, receive that 5-star accreditation or certification, and we're in orange, does that give them some additional capacity beyond what just orange would allow?
Correct. Yeah, in essence, they would be looking at yellow level.
Oh, fantastic. It kind of, so that once you get the certification, you take it with you in the different colors. That's great.
Correct. Yeah. Again, once we hit the metrics below into the orange level.
Reed, did you want to make a comment on Karina's question?
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, once in terms of the increased capacity, it's generally for most of the businesses increasing it from 25% to 50%. So it's a pretty good jump to get into that yellow level.
Definitely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. And then just a quick comment here. I'm going to turn it over to Reed here to do most of the vaccine piece here, but our local paper did an article here just recently, and I know that we shared with council a little over a week that we were in the process here of having our police department vaccinated. And so I think we've got some good news on that front, and I'm going to let Reed take it from there.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, as mentioned last week, we updated council that our LPD was starting to receive their COVID-19 vaccinations through Centura Health, in particular Littleton Adventist Hospital. We had entered into an agreement with Littleton Adventist Hospital back in the fall in hopes that a vaccine might become available so that they can be administered to our police officers and first responders. Gene Enley from LPD, he's our Deputy Chief of Patrol. He heads up the West Arapahoe County COVID-19, it's such a long name, response team, and that includes all the law enforcement agencies on the west side of Arapahoe County. And so through him and his partnership with Littleton Adventist Health, he was able to get all law enforcement agencies on the west side of Arapahoe County signed up for their vaccines. Our understanding is that it's going pretty well. And through that collaboration and partnership, we've also reached a verbal agreement at this point for Littleton Adventist Hospital to provide vaccinations for city employees. That doesn't bump us up on top of the list or anything like that. That simply will be whenever local government's turn comes around. And as you know, that changes every day. Last week, CDPHE basically contacted the hospitals and said, stop giving vaccines to all these teachers because we really need to focus on those individuals that are 70 and older. Today, CDC came out with their own guidelines, which is focus on 65 plus and stop withholding kind of that second dose. Most of the guidance thus far has been when a hospital will say receives 1,000 doses, they're keeping half the doses to be able to provide that second shot, whether that's within 21 days or 28 days, depending on the vaccine that you're taking. The guidance right now that's coming down, and I believe the future president is supporting it as well, is they're comfortable with the supply chain that's coming out. And so they don't feel as if there's necessarily a need to keep kind of those second doses, holding on to them, and so to administer those. So one of the questions that I've received, and I know some council members have received the question, is making this vaccination mandatory, or why isn't the vaccination mandatory? And so I guess kind of just real quick to touch on that, the first answer is because Mark said so. And so that's why it's not mandatory. Secondly, I would say while there is precedent for requiring vaccinations, depending on your profession, I know nurses have to get flu shots, veterinarians need to get rabies shots, children going into the public school system need to have certain vaccinations prior to doing so. So there is precedent to requiring vaccines. There is not precedent to requiring emergency youth authorized vaccines. So that's currently what the current COVID vaccines are. They're EUAs, emergency use authorization. And, largely while the efficacy is pretty good on all these vaccines, there's still a lot of information they don't know. So they're not technically approved. They're just approved to be able to be used during kind of this emergency situation and unprecedented time that we're dealing with right now. But there's a lot of information they still don't know, which is, the effects on children, the effects on pregnant women, whether or not you can even spread COVID while you have it. So a lot of information that still is yet to become. So in short answer, that's probably the reason why this isn't mandated. And I know we've gotten a lot of questions, and that's really the answer. I will tell you, and Mark can chime in if he needs to, we have a pretty strong collaboration with our other local government agencies, and no one else is doing it either. I will tell you, Centura Health is not requiring the COVID-19 vaccines for its employees. So that's my update, and happy to answer any questions. Or Mark, you can jump in and correct all my misstatements.
Well, I'll tell you, Children's Hospital is not mandating it either because it's an emergency use.
Yeah, I think the one piece that I would add is that, I think when I talked to our local paper here, we shared with them that we were at 70% of our staff at that moment in time had actually received the vaccine. That doesn't mean that's the end of that. That just means that moment in time. So over the next, weeks or so here, we may have more of our police department, certainly who'll probably get the vaccine. I think I am going to be looking to see if we can't understand here in the next couple of months, what's the total percentage of all of our employees who have elected to receive the vaccine. Because in the end, we're trying to make a judgment about when can we bring people back together here in order to, maintain the kind of operation we had before COVID. And so we'll just have to assess this over time.
That's right. Cool. Was that it for the city manager?
That is correct. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. City attorney, did you have anything else?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Great. Well, council, if we don't have anything else, we do have a meeting next Tuesday, of course, the 19th at 6:30. And if we have nothing else, it is 8:54 and we are adjourned. Thank you.